You're standing at the edge of a quiet graveyard at dusk. The wind is still, the sky painted in smudges of violet and rust. In your hand, a letter you've rewritten 1,000 times, addressed to someone who broke something in you they can never return. You whisper the words again and burn them over a candle's flame. But the ashes don't lift. They settle in your chest, heavy, cold. You've forgiven them, or so you think. But why does the pain still hum beneath your ribs like a wire pulled too tight? We're told that forgiveness is freedom, that forgetting is strength, that to move on, one must unshackle the past and walk away with lightened steps. But what if you can't forget? What if the memory returns uninvited, in the shower, in traffic, in your dreams? What if it doesn't knock but kicks down the door? They say forgive and forget. But isn't that a lie we tell ourselves to escape the deeper work of understanding? What happens when the mind forgives but the body remembers? When your nervous system still flinches at shadows of betrayal, even while your mouth says, "It's fine, I've moved on." What does it mean to truly forgive? Is forgetting part of that process, or a betrayal of our own history? Here lies the paradox. You are expected to forgive someone who never apologized. You are expected to let go of something that altered you forever, and you are expected to do it not for them but for yourself. But what if forgiveness feels like giving your power away? What if forgetting feels like erasing the lesson written in blood? We imagine forgiveness as a soft release, a peaceful exhale, but sometimes it feels more like standing barefoot on shattered glass, being told not to bleed. What if forgiveness is not about absolution, but evolution? What if it's not a gesture of grace toward the offender, but a kind of psychological alchemy, a brutal transformation that requires not forgetting the wound, but confronting it over and over until it no longer owns you? What if the wound never heals until you stop trying to silence it? And deeper still, why are we so obsessed with forgetting? Why does modern spirituality and pop psychology glorify the erasure of pain as if memory is poison, as if survival means self-induced amnesia? Could it be that forgetting too soon is a kind of death, that to forget too easily is to lose the very architecture of who you became after the fall? Forgiveness and forgetting, these two have been tangled into one phrase, one mantra, one expectation. But are they truly companions or enemies disguised as lovers? What if forgetting robs the pain of its rightful voice, and in doing so, robs you of your full humanity? This is not a question of morality. It's a question of memory, of self-preservation, of what it means to live honestly in a world where harm is not always followed by justice, and closure is often a door that never arrives. And so, you stand at the edge of that graveyard not just to bury what was done to you, but to unearth something deeper, something ancient, a truth that can't be taught, only lived. Are you ready to ask what lies beneath the surface of your forgiveness? Are you willing to stare into the face of memory, without blinking, without retreating, and say, "I will not forget because what I remember matters. The wound remembers"? The question is, will you? Now, let's begin to unearth the roots of this contradiction. Why is forgiveness so difficult, and forgetting even more dangerous? What are the invisible forces that shape how we process harm? And why do we feel pressure to let go before we're truly ready? There's a secret pact we all inherit without realizing it, a silent script passed down from religion, culture, and centuries of moral conditioning. It goes like this: if you are wronged, and you want to be good, strong, enlightened, you must forgive. If you're truly evolved, you will forget. But what if that script is built on a misunderstanding of the human soul? Carl Jung warned us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Forgiveness is not like this. It is darkness first, it is shadow work, and forgetting, when forced, becomes a form of repression, psychic amputation disguised as virtue. Why do we push ourselves to forget? It begins with fear. Fear that remembering will consume us, that to remember is to live forever in pain, to replay a scene without resolution. So, we try to delete. We numb, we distract. But pain denied doesn't vanish. It metastasizes as depression, anxiety, detachment, or worse, in the cold indifference toward our own boundaries. Modern society teaches us to perform wellness rather than embody it. Instagram spirituality tells you to forgive for your own peace, as if forgiveness is a spa treatment. But real forgiveness is war, not with others, with the parts of yourself you've abandoned to make peace with the past. Nietzsche challenged us to reevaluate morality itself. He saw how religion moralized forgiveness, making it not just a virtue, but a duty. Turn the other cheek, love your enemy. But what happens when moral ideals silence real pain? When we're told that to hold on to hurt is to be weak, petty, unevolved? In truth, it's not that people don't want to forgive. It's that they don't know what it truly requires. Forgiveness, when authentic, is not an instant act. It is a process of inner excavation, a reckoning with memory, emotion, and the shattered fragments of identity. It demands truth, and truth, especially personal truth, is often inconvenient. Psychologically, forgetting trauma is not strength. It's a sign of fragmentation, dissociation. The mind, overwhelmed by pain, dislocates the memory. It hides it not to help you grow, but to help you survive. But what's forgotten doesn't heal, it festers. So, when we say forgive and forget, we're encouraging a kind of spiritual dissociation. We're asking the soul to pretend it's whole when it's still bleeding. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, did not preach forgetting. He found meaning in suffering, not in its erasure. His logotherapy taught that healing requires finding purpose in pain, not deleting it. To forget your wound is to lose the very map that shows where you broke and how you survived. There's also a cultural root to this illusion. In individualistic societies, where personal achievement is worshipped, there's little room for open suffering. We are expected to move on quickly, to bounce back, to demonstrate resilience by pretending we were never broken. This creates a toxic urgency to forgive fast and to forget faster. But forgiveness is not a race. It's a ritual, and forgetting is not a milestone. It's often a mirage. Jean-Paul Sartre would say that bad faith, living in self-deception to escape responsibility, is at the heart of modern consciousness. When we force ourselves to forget, we enter bad faith. We deny the authenticity of our own history to make others comfortable, or to fit into the narrative of who we think we should be. Schopenhauer went even deeper. He saw existence itself as marked by suffering, and argued that the will, the blind force behind all human striving, was a source of pain. Forgiveness, then, becomes not a triumph over pain, but a surrender to the truth that suffering is part of being. We forgive not to escape it, but to see it clearly, to live honestly within its contours. So, here's the hidden root of the problem. We are trying to forgive without remembering, to move forward without looking back. We have pathologized pain, turned memory into a disease, and mistook forgetting for healing. But the psyche does not forget. The body does not forget. As Gabor Mate explains, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. And that inner result, be it fear, shame, or loss of safety, cannot be erased by willpower or platitudes. True forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering everything and choosing to no longer be defined by it. It is reclaiming your story, not erasing it. It is saying, yes, this happened. Yes, it changed me. But no, it does not own me. We must stop equating forgiveness with spiritual bypassing. Stop pretending that healing means silence. Sometimes, the most radical act of forgiveness is simply allowing yourself to feel what you feel, without guilt or justification. And so, the wound remains, but not as a curse, as a compass. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into what happens when we suppress this process. What are the unseen consequences, psychological, emotional, and societal, of living in a culture that demands quick forgiveness and shamus memory? How does this hidden pressure warp our identity, our relationships, and our ability to trust? The answer, like the wound, may be more dangerous and more revealing than you think. You think you've moved on. You've said the words, "I forgive you." You've convinced yourself that it no longer matters. That time has blurred the pain into nothingness. But somewhere beneath the polite smiles and the forced serenity, a quiet war continues. What happens when we bury pain too deep? When we mistake forgetting for resolution? When we forgive not from wholeness, but from fear, exhaustion, or social pressure? The consequences are not loud. They don't come crashing through your life like obvious trauma. They whisper, they mutate, they manifest in ways so subtle we don't even recognize them as symptoms. You become afraid to trust not because of what others might do, but because somewhere within, you haven't trusted yourself to acknowledge your truth. You develop anxiety but can't trace its origin. You fear closeness but don't know why. Your body remembers, but your mind won't let it speak. This is the cost of false forgiveness, the psychological toll of performative healing. We don't get over it. We reorganize around it. And this reorganization, this internal restructuring, to protect the wound we were told to forget becomes the architecture of our personality. People-pleasing, emotional numbness, perfectionism, hyper-independence, chronic distrust. These are not quirks. They are survival patterns, the echo of unresolved wounds. Cognitive neuroscience shows us how the brain stores trauma not just as memory, but as emotion, as physiological response. When you suppress the event, the mind doesn't delete the file. It just hides it in the body. Somatic symptoms begin to emerge: migraines, chronic fatigue, autoimmune issues, signals that something is unspoken, unprocessed. And yet society rewards the silence. The more stoic you appear, the more emotionally detached, the more you're praised for being strong. But that version of strength is brittle. It's a mask. And masks don't just hide pain, they isolate us from real connection. You may find yourself unable to experience joy fully, to be present, to trust vulnerability, because somewhere along the line, you internalize the belief that to feel deeply is to suffer, that to remember is to break. So, you numb everything. The spiritual community is not immune to this. In fact, it often makes it worse. Let go and move on. Everything happens for a reason. High vibration only. These mantras, while well-intentioned, become weapons of denial. They offer relief without reflection, light without shadow, growth without grief. Carl Jung called this the tyranny of the good, a compulsive fixation on virtue, positivity, and harmony that leads us to repress anything deemed negative. But the psyche doesn't care about moral categories. It only seeks wholeness. And to be whole, you must integrate the wound, not amputate it. The social consequences ripple further. Entire families, communities, even nations are built on the suppression of collective trauma. Historical atrocities, slavery, genocide, war are sanitized in school books, erased from memory, painted over with the thin brush of reconciliation that demands forgetting without justice. This is how generational trauma persists. When pain is never truly acknowledged, it doesn't vanish, it reincarnates as cycles of abuse, as institutional violence, as inherited shame. On a personal level, the most intimate casualty of false forgiveness is the self. Every time you say it's fine when it's not, a part of you shrinks. Every time you let someone cross a boundary because they didn't mean it, your sense of safety erodes. You become a stranger to your own anger, your grief, your gut instincts, and eventually, you forget what you truly feel. To forgive without grieving is to steal the voice from your inner child, the one who cried, who was betrayed, who was scared and powerless and needed someone to say, yes, that happened, and it mattered. Without that affirmation, you grow up disconnected from your core. You become what others need, rather than who you are. And that disconnection is not just emotional, it's existential. You start to ask, who am I? If I've always edited myself for others, who would I be if I allowed myself to remember? Nietzsche said, "Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders." But he didn't mean it as praise, he meant it as critique. He saw how forgetting offers short-term peace at the cost of long-term consciousness. It lulls us into complacency. It removes the urgency to grow. And here lies the final paradox. The wound you've worked so hard to forget may be the very key to your liberation, but not as a relic of pain, as a portal, because wounds are not just signs of where we've been hurt. They are also where the light gets in, where our deepest wisdom resides, the place where empathy is born, where boundaries are forged, where identity begins to crystallize from suffering. If we skip that journey, if we fake forgiveness and erase memory, we also forfeit the treasure buried in the wound, self-knowledge. In a world addicted to comfort, the pressure to forgive and forget is strong. But healing was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be transformative. And transformation begins not with erasure but with remembrance. So, the real question becomes, can you afford to forget? In the next section, we will explore what it means to break free from this internalized expectation. How do we rebel not with bitterness, but with clarity? How do we reclaim the right to remember, to grieve, to forgive on our terms? What does it look like to practice radical, authentic healing in a culture obsessed with quick fixes? The answers may surprise you, and they may demand that you unlearn everything you thought forgiveness was. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether stepping forward means falling or finally flying. That's the rebellion we speak of, not a rebellion of anger, not a rejection of peace, but a revolt against the performance of peace, against the silence that masquerades as strength, against the forced forgiveness that protects everyone but the one who was harmed. Because healing isn't polite, and real forgiveness is not passive, it is revolutionary. To break free, you must first understand this. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering with power. It is reclaiming your story, not to relive the wound, but to rewrite its ending. Let's begin with a counterintuitive truth. You don't have to forgive to heal. That's right. Forgiveness is not the prerequisite. Presence is, truth is, grief is, and you must grieve what happened before you can ever truly release it. Not bypass it, not intellectualize it, but sit with it, bleed it out, and name every scar with your own voice. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Many people believe they've forgiven simply because they've suppressed, but suppression is not transcendence. It's postponement, and what we postpone only returns darker, sharper, and harder to name. So, how do you rebel? You rebel by remembering, not in bitterness, but in sacred clarity. You write the unsaid letter. You feel the rage you were told was too much. You validate the child in you who wasn't believed, or the adult who never received closure. You remember not because you want revenge, but because the soul demands recognition. And in that remembering, something shifts. The pain no longer controls you. The memory no longer owns you, because it is now yours, not denied, not hidden, not sterilized for the comfort of others. Yours. This is where true forgiveness begins, not as a duty, but as a choice. Not for the other person's peace, but for your liberation. You forgive when your body no longer needs to carry the story as armor, when forgetting is no longer a survival tactic, but a natural outgrowth of wisdom. Forgiveness, then, is not passive forgetting, it is active release. It's saying, yes, it happened, yes, it hurt, and yes, I choose not to be chained to it anymore. But choosing that release requires discernment. Not every wound can be healed with reconciliation. Not every abuser deserves a seat at your table. Sometimes, forgiveness looks like cutting ties without guilt, like rebuilding your life without needing a confession, like healing without apology. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That includes the freedom to redefine forgiveness not as erasure, but as empowerment. Empowerment means taking the narrative back. It means refusing to be defined by what broke you. It means seeing yourself not as a victim trapped in someone else's shadow, but as the author of your next chapter. And here's the paradox. True forgiveness empowers boundaries, not weakness. It sharpens your sense of justice. It makes you less tolerant of harm, not more, because when you've done the work, you no longer confuse avoidance with peace. You no longer accept gaslighting as grace. You see clearly both the beauty and the brutality, and you choose wisely. This is not the forgiveness sold in self-help cliches. It is a warrior's forgiveness, hard-won, deeply embodied, rooted in awareness, not amnesia. And that brings us to forgetting, not the type forced upon you, but the kind that happens when the pain is no longer the defining force in your life. Forgetting, in this sense, is not erasing, it's evolving. The wound becomes a scar, the scar becomes a map, and the map becomes your compass. To forget rightly, you must first remember rightly. Let's look at an example. Think of Nelson Mandela. He forgave but never forgot. He walked out of prison not as a man who erased the past, but as one who transformed it. He remembered everything but was no longer poisoned by it. That is the rebellion, turning pain into purpose, memory into meaning. Now turn inward. What pain are you still pretending not to remember? What parts of yourself have you exiled in the name of being over it? The rebellion begins there. You journal the truth. You tell your story uncensored. You sit in therapy and say the unspeakable. You write the names. You feel the anger. You cry the tears. You scream if you must. You grieve, and in that process, you begin to move not away from the pain, but through it. And eventually, forgiveness arrives, quietly, unexpectedly, not as a moment, but as a becoming. You realize you no longer wish to carry the weight. You no longer need to protect the memory with silence. You no longer fear what it means to remember. And in that moment, forgetting becomes irrelevant because the wound has transformed. It no longer controls you. It has become a teacher. In the next section, we reach the summit, the ultimate truth, the deepest realization about forgiveness, forgetting, and the hidden power within your most painful experiences. A revelation that can only be seen after the fire, after the grief, after the rebellion. Ready for the truth. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the wound you spent years hiding has become your greatest source of wisdom. It didn't vanish. It didn't forget itself. It didn't lie dormant under layers of forced positivity. It simply changed form, and with it you changed. Here is the final truth, the one most are too afraid to confront. The wound doesn't go away. It awakens. It becomes a lens, a language, a pulse of intuition that lives in your bones, not to haunt you but to guide you, to warn you of what once destroyed you, to whisper through your choices, to teach compassion without making you a martyr. The wound becomes a doorway, because forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not the end of pain. It's the beginning of freedom. And forgetting, it was never the goal, because forgetting would be erasing the very thing that taught you who you are. You see, society teaches us that forgiveness is a clean slate, that once you move on, the memory should disappear like smoke. But memory is not the enemy. It is the keeper of wisdom. It is the guardian of pattern, the compass that helps you never return to the places that broke you. In ancient Japanese art, there's a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden. They're illuminated, glorified, elevated. That's what real healing is. Not pretending you were never broken, but making your scars part of the design. This is the paradox. You forgive not to forget, but to remember with power. You forgive not to make the past okay, but to stop it from owning your present. You forgive not because they deserved it, but because you do. You deserve your mind back, your sleep back, your energy back. Forgiveness is an act of self-rescue, but let's not romanticize it. True forgiveness may never look pretty. Sometimes it comes with clenched fists and trembling voices. Sometimes it arrives through therapy, rage, prayer, poetry, silence. Sometimes you have to forgive the same thing 100 times before it finally stays forgiven. And even then, you might still remember. But here's the liberation. Remembering is not the same as reliving. The memory becomes a painting in a gallery, no longer a monster in the basement. You can visit it, observe it, even learn from it without being consumed by it. This is what your soul has been waiting for. not the fantasy of a clean slate, but the real, messy, beautiful work of becoming someone new, because of what you've endured, not in spite of it. And here's one final truth. Sometimes, the person you need to forgive the most is yourself, not because you did something wrong, but because you blamed yourself for someone else's wound, because you stayed silent when you wanted to scream, because you tolerated what should have never been tolerated, because survival sometimes demands decisions that shame would later punish. But you survived, and that survival deserves forgiveness. Can you forgive the version of you that didn't know better? Can you forgive the one who froze, who stayed, who bent, who broke? Because that version, those forgotten selves, are not your shame. They are your ancestors, your earlier selves. They brought you here, and now you have a chance to write the ending they never had. That is the final, most powerful realization. The wound teaches, but the healing defines. You are not what hurt you. You are what you chose to do with it. You are the one who broke the cycle, who faced the pain, who refused to bury it in silence, who dared to live honestly even if it meant carrying your past like fire in your hands. And in that fire, you were made, not perfect, not whole in the traditional sense, but awake, fully, fiercely awake. So let them say you're too intense, too emotional, too unwilling to move on. Let them misunderstand you. You know the truth now. Forgiveness is not an escape from the past, but a declaration of the future. And forgetting, that was never your job. Your job is to live, to thrive, to tell the truth that once nearly destroyed you, and to make art, peace, love, and boundaries out of it. Your job is to remember everything and still choose joy. That is the wound's final lesson. It hurt you, yes, but it also woke you up. You are not broken. You are becoming. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share for more.